Hey everyone, welcome to episode 4 of the J&J Show. As a continuation of episode 3, I think we're going to answer more questions today.
Yeah, I'm Josh Yoskosky, Joe Simon, needless to say, and we did have some feedback from 3, to your point, about, there's certainly more questions that come up. Again, if you were to Google questions to ask your financial advisor, there's a lot of them. Depending on where you look, there's 20, 30, 40, 50. So we wanted to get the opportunity to kind of ping through some of those tactically today with our answers. Again, every advisor's answers may be different. I'm biased. I think our answers are often the right ones. But I will say what's most important about it is they're the honest and transparent answers.
Absolutely.
Because we want to pop the hood, pull the curtain back, whatever you want to call it, and make sure, as we do with our clients, anyone we're speaking to understands how our business works, understands how our industry works, gives you more transparency to, if you're interested in working with us, or even just your own relationship, looking for a relationship, looking for a financial advisor. You know the questions, but also know some of the answers and the whys.
And how we think about it at YTS.
Yep. And the why in YTS, I would say, is why.
Why?
Clients should always ask us why. That should always be a question, again, you're comfortable asking your advisor. So I don't know if you want to hit us with one of the first ones.
What's your investment philosophy?
Investment philosophy. No, it's one that comes up, I think, more so with people that are in tune with the markets or like watching the markets or have an existing advisor that they often, and I think it's a bit of a canary, don't understand their investment strategy. And so, of course, Joe and I serve different purposes. We work differently in relationships. I'm more of the tactical. He's more of the strategic. He is more of the model guy. So I'm going to say, while it's akin, I want to start with Joe more in the nitty gritty of the investment philosophy we have, knowing, and I'll say it before you do, depends on the client.
It does. I mean, everything's obviously, and again, we talked about this in episode 2, customized to the client, right? But I think from a big picture, and again, that's kind of where I typically come in as big picture, we use a core satellite approach, right? So it all starts with our advisory model, right? Which, it's a model that we've spent a lot of time. I think we spent 3 or 4 months building out the last iteration, right?
Well, we live in back testing in the numbers.
Yep, we're gonna make active changes to that portion of the model. It's typically probably the most, I would say, aggressive or most market exposure.
Yeah.
In your portfolio. So that's the core, right? And then we basically build around it, right? And, we have sleeves. So one's our volatility reduction sleeve, right? And that portion of the portfolio is going to give us exposure to indexes with typically some sort of built-in downside protection. And we use a couple of different products there. We use banknotes, right? And that's kind of Josh's area of expertise. Sometimes it's a RILA, registered index-linked annuity. It's a growth vehicle with some sort of leverage and built-in downside protection through a buffer. The growth notes that we use typically have a barrier associated with it, and Josh can probably talk a little bit about how those work, right? And then from there, we have our protection sleeve, and that's the portion of the portfolio that it's going to give us downside protection if the markets are down. It's where we're going to pull money if a client needs money and the market's down 20 or 30%, right? And there we use, we used to use bonds. We've kind of gotten away from bonds because they just haven't acted the way that they really should the last 10 or 15 years.
They're far more tied to equities and the volatility of the market than they were previously.
I mean, I think they're about 70% correlated to equities, right? Which is not what we're looking for in that portion.
For not a big return number at this point.
No. So we've moved to using buffered ETFs, which, through an option strategy gives us real downside protection in the portfolio. And then we've got a couple investments in there that have been pretty stable. We use a mergers and arbitrage fund, which has not had a negative return in 30 years.
No.
So that's if we need cash in a down market, well, that's a great place to go. So that's kind of the structure we use in general. And then from there, we will customize it to each client, right? The percentages they're going to get of model versus volatility reduction versus protection.
But I think one of the big takeaways that it's both true and untrue. And it depends on the products and strategies you're familiar with. It's a cake and eat it too concept. That can you have market level return without market level risk? Yes, you absolutely can. Can you have better than market level return? And then I'm using market in a very general sense, but can you have better than market level return with less than market level risk, but still some risk? Yes, you also can. So when it comes to the investment philosophy we're using, we won't accept less than market level return, but we also want, at least in any circumstance, 70% of market level risk.
Yes.
Typically, we have less than that, but even in our most aggressive portfolio, I'd say we have 70% of the risk of the market through various structured strategies, like you mentioned, buffers, barriers, et cetera. And I think we'll do a podcast just on how those fit in by itself, because that's a long discussion. But it's a case of an efficient portfolio.
Well, and I think, I mean, big picture, I think the way we think of it, right? If we can get you market level returns net of fees with about 20 to 30% less volatility, I think we've done our job and we've done it well.
Absolutely. And you get what you pay for.
Yep.
Because this is a job. This is a business. We do get paid, as we mentioned in the prior podcast, which is why we need to show value.
Yeah.
You have to get something. If you're working with an advisor, you have to get some value in excess of what you'd be able to do on your own.
Yep.
You have to get that. That's a non-negotiable for us.
And that's the benefit of working for us, right? Because we have vehicles available to us as advisors, not available to the general public, right?
Yeah.
And it's the use of those vehicles that allow us to outperform the market with less risk. I don't think a lot of clients realize that those vehicles exist.
Yeah. And a lot of them, I think it's a case just because the advisor they have is settled into the way they run their business, good, bad, or other. They're not learning about new strategies. They may or may not be lifetime learners. And just because a strategy is new to you as an advisor doesn't mean it hasn't been around a decade or two. It's just that you don't use it, you're not familiar with it. And a subset of that, and my final thought on it is, you might be limited by the firm you're with.
Yep.
The firm you're with may or may not allow you to use any number of structures. It may not be on their short list. It may not be on their long list. It just goes to the idea of having open architecture, which is a long-winded way. This is the short answer to the discussion that we just had, the statements we just made. Open architecture.
Yeah.
We're agnostic. We can use whatever's out there.
Well, and that's actually one of the reasons, and I think probably the same for you, that I made the shift to LPL Financial, which is where we're at right now, is that open architecture structure. The firm I was at previously, we couldn't use 90% of the vehicles that we use now for our clients. So I was very, limited in what I could do. And actually, I was almost limited to what we talked about earlier in the last episode, to just doing a standard model portfolio, which is, again, really not, for me, it wasn't enough to accomplish what I needed to for my clients long term.
Agreed. All right, we'll see what the next question is.
How will you track investment performance?
So investment performance, why you're investing. It might be for income, admittedly, but we believe in always having growth in there at a minimum. I don't even know if it's an acceptable standard at this point to keep pace with inflation. That doesn't really even seem like a good answer anymore, because that's pretty achievable at this point.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think when we think about it, right, again, we're shooting for, again, what we said, net of fees, market returns, with less volatility. And if we can do that, again, clients taking 4% a year in income and retirement, inflation's 3%, well, we should be growing the portfolio by inflation plus another 2 or 3% on top of that over time.
Absolutely.
And, I think that for us, that's a minimal goal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, keeping pace with inflation doesn't take a lot of effort at this point, looking at the number of strategies that are out there of any type. And it does come down to the numbers. So if the question is, how do we track investment performance? Every time we have a discussion, every time we meet, I'm at a minimum going to be able to provide you with 1-year numbers of how your investments are doing. I'm at a minimum going to be able to provide you with 3-year numbers, because investing is long term, but it's relevant how something's done recently. And we're probably going to be able to get you 5, 7, and 10 as well, assuming we've been working together that long.
And honestly, though, I think the most important number, at least for me, is that 3-year number. Anything can happen in a year, anything can happen in 3 months or 6 months, right? But, showing that longer term track record, I think is really indicative of, is your, investment process working?
Absolutely. And even the more boutique investments, we've put in the time, I will say, to come up with the tracking means to show the numbers for those. One thing that I know we both believe in, because we hold the meetings this way, is we're not going to hide from the numbers.
No.
We're not going to hide from what the performance has been. We're not going to hide from if something has met or missed expectations.
I mean, every review meeting that I do starts with, from a 1-year basis and then a 3-year basis. This is what you had a year ago. This is what you had now. And this is the percentage of growth we've had.
Absolutely. So what we use is consolidated reports. We give a 40,000-foot view of your portfolio as a whole. So that's a way to track holistically what we're doing. Then we look at each account individually at the 10,000-foot view. And then if we want to get to the 5,000-foot view of individual investments, we do that as well. So it's, as far as tracking our performance, that's, again, a minimum standard that's easily done. We do it in every meeting. We're going to give you the performance on everything you have.
And that's the purpose of the review, is actually, to track performance, talk to the client about what's working in the portfolio and what might not be working. And if it's not working, what changes we're recommending based around that, or what changes we made to our advisory models over the last 2 or 3 months, since we last met. That's the purpose of our reviews, as well as, catching up with the client and seeing if there's any changes going on in their life too, as well, that we need to be aware of.
Absolutely. And it comes down to some clients, well, what's the index you want to use as your benchmark? Do you want to use the S&P 500 and Russell 3000? Are you into the all-country world? What do you want to use? We'll make that comparison. Again, we're not going to hide, nor should any advisor hide. This is a numbers business. Hide from what the performance has been like.
100% agree.
How will you communicate with the client and how often?
Yeah, so communication with clients somewhat ties into how are we going to work together. And sometimes it's going to depend on the type of investment strategies we use, because some strategies just by law and by definition require higher levels of communication, discretionary versus non-discretionary. But at a minimum, we're going to have, I'd say there's no one that has, normally by their own request, 1 meeting a year. Some people only want 1. That's fine.
At a minimum. A lot of it's client driven too, right? It's one of the first things or first conversations I have a client when we're onboarding them is, what is your expectations for, review meetings? Again, some clients do only want 1. And I mean, I've had clients that have, $2, $3, $4 million with us that only want 1 meeting a year. And then we've got clients that, may only have a couple $100,000 with us that want 4 a year or 5 a year, and that's fine. We don't limit clients. We're there if they need us. So, and it's not just the meetings that are communications. We do a lot more on top of that, right? Well, we're communicating right now through this podcast, right?
Newsletters, market commentary. When we have a question that comes up a lot on the administrative or operational side, we tend to send newsletters on that as well. So there is, lo and behold, I don't actually know the number of communications between meetings, phone calls, whether it's ourselves, the administrative and operations team, social media, to your point, podcasts like this. I mean, I would say on average, the opportunity for any given client throughout a year to communicate with us is at least a dozen.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that's a conservative estimate, that a client is hearing from us in one, form or another, at least once a month, at a minimum.
Yep, I agree. All right, we'll see what the next one is.
How do you manage risk in a portfolio?
Risk management goes into
the old adage, huh?
And it goes into portfolio management and philosophy. But I will say, even in my time in the business, and you can probably speak to this better than I can, the ability to manage risk has changed a lot in at least the past decade.
Yeah, well, I mean, 20 years ago when I started, it was just, the percentage of bonds you had in a portfolio, right? Now there's so many other vehicles and tools, and we actually employ, all of them to some extent or another. But again, risk is very personalized to a client, right, as well. So we've got clients that, hey, they want to be full on market risk, and, that's fine as long as, it's reasonable based on what they're trying to accomplish, right? That's part of our job as an advisor, is to, tell a client what's going to work, what's not, what's reasonable, what, how their plan's projecting. So, obviously it's got to be within reason. Otherwise we're going to have a conversation about risk, right? But again, there's a lot more tools, and I think we talked about it in our last episode. We have 2 sleeves in our core satellite approach that address risk. It's our volatility reduction
Absolutely.
sleeve, where we use a couple different types of vehicles, and our protection sleeve, where we're using those buffered ETFs with option strategies. But
Yeah. And from a tactical answer, so my side of the ledger, okay, if you say I want market level returns, but I want to manage risk, and frankly, if you want market level returns, that should just by default be minimizing risk, but neither here nor there. A number of options. You could get market level performance with FDIC insurance. If you so chose, that's what you want. That can easily be accomplished. That's easy to do. If you want slightly better than market level returns, you could probably have no risk through principal protection, backed by some bank internationally or domestically. That can be done as well. You can have better than market level return. Again, depends on the market you want to use, but just ignoring that for today's purposes. You could have principal protection backed by a bank. That's easily achievable as well. You could say, I really want to go out there and get some multiple of the market, 1.5 times, 2.2 times. You can do that, and you can have some downside protection. Maybe that's a buffer, which is a form of protection that's going to stay there. Maybe it's a barrier where you're protected just to a certain point, and then you have full market risk. But looking at the metrics around those, 90+% of the time you can be protected from most market losses just through using the structures that are honestly readily available. These structures, are they institutional products? To your point, yes, they're available to advisors because they're institutional, but we're not the only people in the world that have them by any means.
No, I mean, they're widely available, but I always tell clients too, when it comes to risk, right, you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? So there's always give and take, right? So, it comes down to typically, in my opinion, 3 levers, right? Full market returns, downside protection, liquidity, right? You can't have all 3. You got to give up one. So if you want, for example, full market returns with downside protection, well, you're going to give up liquidity, right?
Absolutely.
So there's always a give and take here. And, as long as the client understands that, I think everybody's going to be happy. And we can accomplish what your goals are.
Absolutely. And because, to your point, because we're not the only advisors that have access to them, these are things that your advisor should be talking to you about. If you are saying, or if you're doing goals-based planning, for example, where you have a financial plan that says in order for your plan to be successful, you only need a 6 to 7% annualized return. I'm telling you, you do not need to undertake anywhere near full market risk to achieve
not
that.
at all.
And if your portfolio is full market risk to get 6 to 7%, that's a misstep. Aggressive note to end on.
I love it.
For that question.
One second. We're at 18 right now. We can do a couple more questions, I think.
Yeah,
That's fine.
We'll just keep going
Doesn't
until
matter.
somebody says otherwise. So
Josh can talk all day long.
Joe can give better answers all day long.
I don't know about that, but
You stay on point better than I do.
I do. You kind of, that's always been the case. So.
I understand. That's true.
It's-
It is.
I'm very direct and to
So
the
I gotta
point.
hand it
like
over.
I don't like. It's funny because if you see me with a client when we're talking about personal
Yeah, it's the
stuff,
opposite.
pro meeting, I'm
Yeah.
like I'll talk all day about life and whatever. But once we get to business, it's like boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, in a meeting, I'll be done in 5 minutes. Here, the same answer would take me 15.
Yeah.
So
What's your approach to retirement planning or any other specific goals?
I think the most important thing is just getting started, right? And
Yeah,
getting
for
started
any
as
financial
soon
plan,
as
for
possible.
any goal.
Yep, for any goal. Yep. Yeah, no reason to wait. But again, I think it just comes down to, and this is more of a planning thing, right? So it all starts, if you've got a goal, we got to sit down, talk about what that goal is, what the timeline is, put a plan together, right? That's where the planning comes in, and then execute on it, right? It's almost as simple as that.
Yeah.
But one thing people don't do is execute on a goal, get started.
Well, and we see a lot less than I think we did years ago, but people going through the plan, doing the work of getting the plan together, doing the hard work of answering the questions they may or may not be comfortable with, but then no execution.
Yeah.
And that's the part that I think can be very tough with any goal is what are we? We're consultants.
Yep.
So what am I committing to do in our relationship to give you bad news?
Yeah.
And the bad news may be that we're not tracking toward our goal. And it's a question of what is our commitment to that goal. Almost any goal is achievable.
Yep.
how long it's going to take, the amount of pain that we might have to endure to get to it, well, that's a bit of a different story.
And I always talk about that with goals. I say that's the biggest part of my job is to get a client from point A to point B. Point A and point B are different for every single person, right? My job is to get them there as efficient as possible. For some people, it's going to be a straight line. For some people, it's going to be a zigzag. And, it all comes down to the resources and the time they have available, right? So, but we can do it. It's just a matter of, again, what's the catch? Is it going to take us longer? Do we have to invest more resources? Do we have to tighten up our budget? Yeah, we can typically get there. It's just a matter of, making sure that we put the proper plan together and we start as soon as possible. And I think that's what we see all the time is people come in, we'll go through this whole process with them. They love the plan. And then they're like, well, you know what? I want to wait 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months to execute on it because I've got all these other things going on in my life.
Yep.
And what's more important than your financial future as far as
And
I'm
they'll never
concerned?
be a convenient
Yeah,
time.
no, they won't.
That's just the way that life works, whether it's family, money, whatever it is. There's never going to be a convenient time. You'll always find a reason, and this is just people. I mean, this is more a personal philosophy, but you'll always find a reason not to do something.
No, absolutely. It's just a matter of how important it is to you, right?
Yeah.
And if your financial future, your retirement, achieving your goals is important, you're going to want to put a plan together and execute on it as soon as possible. Because I'll tell you, the one thing that we can't get back and the one thing we can't make up is time, right?
Absolutely. No, there's no substitute for time. Every goal starts, to your point. You got to talk about it. You have to put a plan together, and that's a part of also the triaging of goals, which can be hard. I will say, in any circumstance, triaging goals can be hard, which is why you have to do a financial plan. And it's a case of, hey, what's my global goal? My global goal is retirement, but I also want to buy a house in there. I want to buy a boat. I want to buy a car. I want to get married. The earlier you start, the earlier you can have a plan that incorporates all of those goals.
And the more likely you're going to be able to achieve it, right? The longer you wait, there may have to give up a few things, right? Your goal may not, you may have to live on less money. You may not be able to buy that, Lamborghini that you want down the road someday, right? So there's always give and take, but I will tell you the one thing that we can't make up on is the time, and the earlier you start, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. And that is our approach to any financial plan of we got to talk about it.
Yeah.
We got to start.
Well, that's why I think, we are so adamant on wanting to work with and meet the children of our current clients, right? Because the earlier we can get them started, the more successful they're going to be as well, right? And they get familiarized with us.
Absolutely.
They get, and they take more of an active approach in, not only their own financial success, but their parents. It makes the transition down the road a lot easier for them as well.
Oh, and it can make it more efficient.
Yeah.
If legacy is important to the parents, we can most likely put you in a better situation to transfer better quality of assets to your kids, which may really influence their financial plan, whether they've started it or not.
And it all starts with starting as early as possible.
Absolutely. No substitute for time.
One more question, guys, and we'll wrap up.
Sure thing.
How do you help clients avoiding emotional investing mistakes?
That's a big, I say they're all big ones. I have to stop saying that. But taking, and it's it's not intended to be a canned phrase, but I think I've started using it this way, is one of the core values of using an advisor should be taking the emotionality out of investing.
That's why we do what we do for the clients is that, again, it's our job to talk the numbers with the clients, right? The numbers are going to tell the story, and the numbers will take the emotionality out of it, right? So, clients, and if you look at, the kind of the history of the markets, I used to talk about the odd lot theory, right? I don't know if you remember that from your training, right? Institutional investors will always look at what's going on and what the odd lotters are doing, which the odd lotters are essentially individual retail investors, right? And the institutional investors are always going to do the exact opposite because the individuals almost always make the wrong decision, right? That's the theory. They are, buying when they should be selling and selling when they should be buying, right? And it's because of the emotionality, right? So they're making decisions based on, emotional, thought processes going on in their head. And that's really our job, is to take that out of it, work on the numbers, just like anything else. And what we've learned is, it's time in the market. We were having this conversation yesterday, right? It's time in the market. So, you got to be able to ride the storm out. And that's kind of where we come in and play therapists sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I think this most recent market pullback, it took about a week and a half, and then we started getting calls from clients that were concerned. And, we just had to talk through the numbers. And,
Absolutely.
Reaffirm that, hey, You've got plenty of time, and all you need to do is stay invested. We'll ride the storm out, and we've built the portfolios to withstand that as well.
And I think that's one of the keys, because there's two phrases in there that people overuse, advisors overuse: stay the course,
Yep.
stay invested.
Yep.
That's true. I won't argue those on their face, but it's what are you invested in,
Yep.
and what are the strategies that you're using? Are you using a static, I have 3 mutual funds and I'm going to hold them indefinitely? Yeah, you'll probably make money.
Yep.
That's probably the case. Will you pay more in fees? Probably. Will you pay more in taxes? Probably. But ignoring that for the global discussion. But it's a case of what were you using? Could you have made more money being more dynamic or more tactical? Absolutely. So staying the course, staying invested are core philosophies of investing.
Yep.
Can't argue that. And we talk about it about how we do it as opposed to how the mainstream advisor or the retiring advisors or the not so great advisors may do it. Of when we're staying invested, it doesn't mean that we're going to have the same mainstream investments now as we do 6 months from now, nor did we 6 months ago. It's going to be, and again, not everything is about product or strategy or placement, but a lot of it is because, to your point, this is numbers driven.
And I mean, I can comfortably tell a client to stay the course, right? We can ride the storm out because I know based on how we build portfolios, we've accounted for that.
Yep.
We've accounted for this scenario. And, if a client needs a distribution or, suddenly needs $20,000 to
We already planned for
do
that.
whatever, we've planned for it. We've got a portion of the portfolio we can go to that more than likely than not has been, has not been hit.
Yep.
That is, that is not down. And that's where we're gonna take the funds from.
Absolutely. And that's consulting versus sales.
Yep.
That doesn't mean you don't have the right to call and ask.
No.
I hope that you do. I hope that you're comfortable enough to call and ask a question of, hey, and that's happened most recently. And it's happened even as recent as meetings this morning of, hey, are there any changes we're thinking about? And yeah, there probably are. Maybe there's some growth to value changes we're thinking about. But as a global whole, when we started working together, we put your portfolio together in a specific way based around you, based around everything we know to be true. If that changes 6 months from now, then yes, we're going to potentially change with it. We're not going to have a knee-jerk reaction. We're going to give everything. We're going to make sure we let the numbers dictate what we do.
And I tell clients this at the end of every meeting, if something comes up, if you got a concern, you got a question, don't be shy, reach out. That's what we're here for. That's what you're paying us for.
Yep. You always have the right, because we hear advisors tout this sometimes of, oh, well, if clients call me, no, those are the clients I want to get rid of.
Yeah, no.
Well, they're probably indicating something, and maybe they're indicating that you didn't explain the strategy well. That on its face, it's, if we're the consultant and we're supposed to be the expert in the room and they have a question, well, it falls to us to explain it in a way that they can understand it.
And honestly, if we hadn't done that, I want the opportunity to do that, to get it right, to explain it to the client and make sure they understand it.
Yeah, because it is taking the emotionality out of investing, sometimes being a bit of a therapist or family counselor or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, the thing that we can move back to when it comes to this question, because again, this is holistic planning. Emotions drive decisions. That's objectively true. But when it comes to objectivity, it comes down to the numbers when you're talking about the wealth management portion and looking at what the portfolio's done in the past, what future scenarios and expectations are for that portfolio. It's going to the numbers.
And I think it's just reassuring the client that, hey, even though we've got all this going on in the external environment, we're still on track for your goals, right? And, I think it just, once you've had that conversation with them, they feel a lot better.
Yeah.
And again, that's how you keep clients happy.
Yeah. Not having a meeting, because we know advisors that have done this, we've witnessed it firsthand, having a meeting where, you ask the personal questions, which we do in every meeting, but then you kind of skirt around the numbers or skirt around performance when that's not something you want to talk about. You may fixate on, well, this meeting I decided we really want to talk about, Medicare planning.
Yeah.
We really want to talk about your health care because they want to avoid the accountability of what are the numbers.
And honestly, if the numbers don't look good for one reason or another, I want to talk to the client about it because I want the opportunity to explain, hey, why this didn't work the way we want it to work and what we're doing about it, the changes that we're making to address it.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. So taking the emotionality out, talk about the numbers, talk about having a long-term strategy. Talk about having some tactical changes where we need them, but not doing anything as a knee-jerk reaction. It's just a discussion.
Yeah.
Like anything else.
Absolutely.
It's just a discussion, and the advisor or advisor should be able to show you what's been going on in the portfolio. And if you don't know, you have the right to ask. And if it's not something they want to go into, well, you can deduct what you want from that.
And if you don't love it, or you want to make a change, we'll find another solution, right?
Yeah. And get a second opinion.
Yeah,
I mean, much like a doctor. I mean, if things are going on in your portfolio, you don't understand, you don't like, you're not getting the transparency, you're not hearing from them, get a second opinion.
Yeah.
You have every right to do so. This question comes up. Quick subset of that is, it's your money. You have the right to move it.
Yep.
Because sometimes people ask that of, well, what's the process? Do I even have the right to move my money? I've heard this recently. Well, I signed something with this advisor, so I really can't leave or anything like that. You probably just signed an account opening paperwork, etc. It's always your money. It's your decision who you work with based on where you're comfortable.
Well, thanks for joining us again. If you loved the episode, make sure to like,
Comment.
subscribe. See you next time.